I want to acknowledge the OCLC Research Library Partnership, which both underwrites and inspires our work. Attendees of this webinar are from the OCLC RLP, and we want to thank you for your continued support and input into our work. These are both crucial to our success. And so with that, I am thrilled to welcome our presenters today. We have Rebecca Bryant, who's my colleague at OCLC, Anna Clements from University of St. Andrews, and Jan Franzen from the University of Minnesota. I'm going to turn things over to Rebecca Bryant. So Rebecca, go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thanks, Marilee. Again, I'm Rebecca Bryant, and we'll be talking about the results of our recent joint survey called Practices and Patterns in Research Information Management. And we're going to do this today by talking a little bit about the partnership between OCLC Research and euroCRIS, the goals, scope, and aims of the survey, and the key findings. And just a reminder, OCLC Research is the research and development arm of OCLC and has been conducting this research for the last 40 years. We encourage you to learn more at our website and to follow us on our blog called Hanging Together. So to situate what we're doing, for the last 2.5, 3 years, OCLC has been engaged in an arc of research related to research information management and specifically the role of libraries. And we've had 3 publications during that time, all of which are available at oc.lc/RIM, which you can see at the bottom. They're all available openly. And these research studies and position papers have sought to better understand the landscape globally and to understand different aspects of that. So the first one I want to just briefly mention, this position paper called Research Information Management, Defining RIM and the Library's Role. This was an effort between myself and members of our Research Library Partnership to really develop a definition of research information management that can work for us globally. Even though we call this different things, we might in Europe call this Current Research Information Systems or CRIS systems. In the US, we're often talking about these as research profiling systems, RPSs, or researcher profiling systems, or research networking systems, or we might be talking about a specific workflow within that, which is faculty activity reporting. But in our effort is we wanted to unify these and to define research information as the aggregation, curation, and utilization of metadata about research activities. So it doesn't matter what you're doing in the world, what your specific goal is. If you're working to collect the scholarly outputs of your institution, or in other words, to have an institutional bibliography of your works, we think you're doing research information management or some form of that. So it's really about the different kinds of metadata. And we defined that in that position paper. And we also tried to break it down into the different kinds of uses, understanding that there are lots of different drivers. This, in turn, was really part of how we constructed the survey, was looking at these different kinds of uses, whether it's for external research assessment, which we see in some parts of the world, public profiles, for faculty activity reporting or annual academic progress reviews, or to support your institutional repository. Those are all relevant uses that we explored in that. So Anna, I believe, is unmuted and can talk a little bit about euroCRIS.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. I hope everybody can hear me okay. So yes, I'm Anna Clements. I'm Assistant Director of the Library Services at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. And I've also been a member of euroCRIS, which I'll talk a little bit about, since 2006 and been a board member since 2013. So euroCRIS, it's a not-for-profit global organization for research information experts, technology and best practice. And as Rebecca mentioned, we tend to call RIM systems CRIS systems in Europe, so hence the name. The euroCRIS was founded in 2002, and we now have over 200 institutional and individual members from all across the world, so not just in Europe. So we have members in North and South America, Australia, New Zealand, the Middle East, China, Japan, and India, as well as from many of the countries in Europe. So we are a very collaborative organisation, and we work with organisations and initiatives who are also interested, like we are, to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of research information management right through the research life cycle, which broadly means trying to ensure that the researcher is left to do the research rather than worry about re-entering research information in many different systems. We do this through strategic partnerships, and you can see the logos of the various partners that we work with across the bottom of the slide. And our most recent strategic partnership, which was signed in 2017, was with OCLC, and it's great to be working with them. One of the main things that we do is the technology side. So as well as the expertise, the experts and so on, we also look after and maintain the common European research information format, open standard data model for research information. And as you can see from the screen, this is a very stylized view of the model, but it represents all the different content types of research information across the research life cycle. We are working currently with OpenAIRE and various RIM or CRIS system providers to implement this model as well, particularly for OpenAIRE compliance, which is something that's ongoing. So coming back to the strategic partnership, which we'll be talking about more with euroCRIS and OCLC, obviously one of our goals is to conduct research together, and one of the very concrete ways that we've been doing that is by doing this joint survey. So I'll pass back now to Rebecca, who can take us on through the next part of the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Anna. So yes, our two organizations work together to conduct this research, and again, it's publicly available. And I'll also mention that not only have we published the report, but also we've published the data set. So when you go to this link, you can find your way also to find the data, and we encourage you to expand on our research by exploring the data yourself and possibly, publishing on it as well. So we're going to specifically talk about some results related to incentives and how these are different in different parts of the globe, uses, the state of interoperability and the different stakeholders and how that may vary, and then the use of persistent identifiers. So a few things. Background was that we collected the data from October 2017 to January 2018 in English and Spanish versions. One of the hardest things about the survey was getting it in the hands of the right people, because they might be in the library, they may be more likely in a research office. There are probably multiple people at an institution who need to find this, but also that this being a global survey, it's just really hard to do that. But we did our best, and we hope that when we repeat the survey in the future, we'll work with all of you to do an even better job and have an even larger sample. So we worked through our own communications channels. We communicated with CRIS or RIM vendors and their user communities. And we promoted this to social media, listservs, and as many announcements as we could find in the research and library community. And as a result, we had 381 survey respondents from 44 countries. You could see that the majority of those, 40%, reported being from European, Middle East, or African countries. And you can see some of the breakdown there with sizable samples from the UK, Italy, and also from the Netherlands, which is a highly representative sample. 24% from the Americas, most of those being from the United States and Peru, which actually partnered with us to promote, and so they had responses from all of their research institutions there. And then lower numbers from Asia Pacific, although a good sample from Australia. And a significant number that didn't report their country, and so it's just sort of a little unknown to us. we did ask people if they currently have a live RIM system, or if they were in the process of implementing or procuring or exploring or possibly not even considering. The majority of our sample, and then that actually constitutes most of the data we're going to be talking about today, were institutions that reported having a live RIM system, so 58% of that. And then the majority of those, of course, being from Europe. As you can see on the right, within our sample, we had the largest groups reporting that they were using Elsevier's Pure system, but almost as many indicating they were using something developed in-house, and then other numbers that sort of fall off from there. And then from that, as we sort of dig into the data, we're going to transfer over to Jan.
Thanks,
who's
Rebecca.
going to be talking about this, and I believe, yep, you have control of the slides now.
Okay, great, thank you. Thanks, and good morning, everyone. I'm Jan Franson from the University of Minnesota. What you're seeing on the screen right now is an example of what the respondents were seeing. This was our question where they were given 6 reasons for why their institution had pursued RIM activities, and they were asked for how important those reasons were for their institutions. If I go on, hold on, I'll go on to the next slide. We practiced this, really. Here we are on the results. So the managing annual activity reporting was considered to be the most important for most of the people in the survey. And you can see it go on down from there to, at the bottom, recording IR facilities and their use. Now, since we were representing many different countries here, and the people who were doing the research also represented different countries, we were really interested in seeing how that would break out. Now, keep in mind, again, as Rebecca said, we had about 28% who didn't indicate a country, but of those that did, we tried as much as we could to see where the patterns were. So here's one. In addition to asking the institutions why they had pursued RIM, we also asked how they were using their current RIM system. One of the options was supporting external research assessment workflows, and we saw some clear regional differences there. In the UK and Australia, countries were with national research assessment exercises, the function was extremely important to nearly all the respondents. And that use was at least important to most institutions in Italy and the Netherlands and Peru. But then when you get down to the US and Canada, which don't have standardized requirements for reporting or national assessment exercises, we see a much more colorful chart there. When we looked at expertise discovery as a reason for pursuing RIM, we saw a much higher number in the US and Canadian institutions saying that it was extremely important. By contrast, no institutions in the Netherlands considered expertise discovery extremely important. And that is probably because the Dutch have a nationally aggregated portal for discovery of expertise and research. So the US is kind of an outlier here. We don't have a national compliance requirement format the way other countries do. The early emphasis here for adopting a system like this was in research networking systems. So that really was the focus, was people finding each other. So for the next survey, we'd really like to increase promotion for those communities where that was the emphasis, the ones that we saw emerge in the US early on. And we want to know a little bit more about the incentives for people to shift away from compliance and towards expertise to see whether that starts to happen in other places. Here's the other question that I just mentioned. We knew that many institutions had an initial driver for adopting RIM, but it might not account for all of the uses that later developed. So we asked about the importance of a number of the other RIM functions. This is our chart for that. 3 functions were listed as extremely important to at least half the respondents: registry of institutional research outputs, external research assessments, as I mentioned previously, and internal reporting. But every item we listed was considered extremely important by at least a few of the respondents. Again, we were interested in the regional differences. As with compliance with external mandates, most countries with enough respondents to look at separately considered the RIM to be an extremely important registry of institutional research outputs. But in the US and Canada, once again, we place far less importance on that function. Although the regional differences to open access to publications isn't quite as stark, it's easy to see which countries' funders have open access mandates. In the U.S., where we do have compliance on for some funding, the responsibility is on the researchers rather than their institutions to make that happen. We see all the lines drop back just a little bit for open access to data sets. Mandates regarding access to publications have been around a lot longer, so the responses to those functions are likely to align a little bit more closely with the previous one in future surveys. So for most people, RIM was valuable as a registry of the institution's research outputs, and it has multiple uses at most institutions. Some of the differences do appear to be regional, but we're really interested when we do this survey again to see how that shifts over time. And now I'm going to pass it back over to Anna.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted and I think I've got control of the slides. Okay, so I'm going to talk about interoperability, which is obviously an area I'm particularly interested in, but we're all interested in understanding how the RIM systems interoperate with both systems within the institution and outside the institution. So this is the slide where we can see the various internal and external systems. So on the left-hand side, you can see the internal systems which interoperate with the live RIM systems. And we asked the respondees they could choose more than one of the systems. So obviously there's a lot of multiple selections here. You can see, probably unsurprisingly, on the left-hand side that the internal systems that have the highest percentage of interoperability with the RIM systems are the human resource systems for information about the individual faculty and researchers, and institutional authentication systems. And then behind that a bit more is the institutional repository systems, which I will talk about in more detail because that's an area in particular that we wanted to drill down into. For the external systems, we were interested in the interoperability there, in particular with the publication metadata sources, and that is where almost, well, over 3/4 of the live RIM systems bring in publication metadata from different data sources. And again, in one of the next slides, I'll drill down more into the individual sources. But a substantial number also interoperate with researcher and author ID registries, so for example, ORCID, as well as research metric sources and so on. On the other side of pushing information out rather than bringing information in, then you can see a bit further down there are various percentages against national reporting systems and various aggregated research portals. So drilling down into the publication metadata sources, where we saw that over 3/4 of the RIM systems do bring in publication metadata from different sources. Unsurprisingly, at the top there we have the big suppliers, so Scopus and Web of Science, but coming closely behind we have PubMed, and then down into Crossref and Archive, and then it tails down there. What I think was quite interesting, and I think OCLC in particular were interested to see how many systems interoperate with WorldCat, particularly say for book data. So there are a small number percentage there that do interoperate. As I mentioned before, we are very interested in how RIM systems interoperate with repository systems, or are actually used as the default repository system. So we asked two types of questions here. So the first question was to ask the respondees whether their institutional research system, their RIM system, served as their default repository for the three different types of objects that you can see there on the screen. So as their institutional repository, as their thesis repository, and as their research data repository. And here you can see, not unsurprisingly, that there are more who are using for the institutional repository, so over 50%, about just over 1/3 for the thesis repository, and about 1/4 for the data repository. And I think that comes back, particularly for the data side of things, and then obviously the mandates and so on for open data are a lot younger than for other types of objects, so publications and so on. We wanted then to drill down into to see whether there were regional differences. We've seen regional differences in some of the other questions, so we wanted to see if there were regional differences for this particular question. And indeed, we did see that. So in terms of the institutional repository, there you can see the blue bar there is in Europe. Now, and you compare the 69% there of European research information systems that serve as default institutional repositories compared to just 14% in the US and Canada. And there are similar differences both in the research data and the thesis side as well. So that again is quite an interesting finding, and it's something that I think we would like to understand more about why that's happening. We also then wanted to talk about interoperability between the two different systems, and I think this is something we've probably learned from the answers that we've got, that I don't think these questions were the difference between these two questions was particularly clear. What we were asking for now is how a research information system actually interoperates with an existing, if you like, traditional repository like DSpace or ePrints. So rather than the RIM or CRIS system itself serving as the repository, those situations, instances where the CRIS system is linked to a separate repository and passes information to that repository. So here overall we had over 40% had their RIM systems, this is the live RIM systems, linked to their institute's repository, 16% for their data repository, and up to 20% for their thesis repository. Again, we were interested in the differences, if there were any, on the regional, between regions. So here again, we've broken it into the main regions: Europe, US, Canada, Australia, and the others. It's a little unfortunate that we have such a high number of others, and I think that's one of the things that we've probably learned, is that we didn't make the country mandatory in our survey. And I think when we run the survey again, which is what we're planning to do, then I think we will make country a mandatory field, because it is really quite important for us to be able to do the analysis. But here, coming back to what we can see here, so the institutional repositories, again, we have the most institutional repositories interoperating in Europe. We have quite a few in the US and Canada, and more institutional repositories interoperating in Australia, but the numbers between Australia and Europe are quite similar, and then the numbers fall off both for data and for thesis repositories. So the other thing that we were interested in from an interoperability point of view, so not just the interoperation with the repositories, but also the types of standards, the open standards and other protocols that were in use or applicable or important for the research information systems. So here we have at the top, so we actually asked this question both for the live RIM systems and those implementing the RIM. So at the top, the protocol that is most prevalent there is the OIA-PMH protocol, just as it is with repositories, with 45% in both the live and the implementing RIM systems saying that was important. Then quickly after that, we get the Serif and the Serif XML standard that I mentioned earlier on as being important, both for live and also for those implementing. The shibboleth obviously is for authentication. Further down, we have, I think, quite an interesting finding in the field of science, or the FOSS classification, in that there seems to be a significant number of implementing RIM systems that are planning to implement that compared to the live system. So that will be interesting to see whether it does follow through when we run the survey again. So just some summary, some findings then from the interoperability section. Then I think it is fair to say that interoperability is important, as we can see from the findings that a significant degree of systems do interoperate with both institutional and external systems. And obviously what they do as well is there is a lot of publications, metadata harvesting, so reuse of information, which is great. And also that both OAI, PMH and Serif XML are important standards. And there's just a couple of quotes there that we picked out from the survey, which is talking specifically about the interoperability aspects of RIM systems. Both they're saying that they are good, and also where there is obviously more room for improvement. So again, we hope to be able to pick up on that when we run the survey again. So I'm just going to have a couple of slides about the stakeholders as well, because as Rebecca said in her introductory slides, then research information systems, by the nature of the information that they hold, that information comes from all parts of the institution and is obviously important to different parts of the institution as well. So we asked, we have specified specific research information management activities, and we asked which of the different offices across the institution had primary responsibility for any or all of these specific activities. So this is a graph which just shows the number of mentions for any of the activities. So, for example, at the top we can see for live RIMS, which is the blue bar, the research office has the most mentions as primary responsible for the most number of RIM activities, which is not surprising, I think. But it's closely followed, I think, by the library, which is interesting. And then we have the IT systems, the Provost Chancellor, so the President's Office, if you like, academic units is mentioned there as well. But there is, as we expected, a fair spread. And I think this was, as Rebecca was saying at the start, it's quite difficult for us to find the right people to get the survey results that we're looking for. And my final slide is again to drill down into any regional differences in primary responsibility. Now here what we have in this graph, it's quite a colourful graph, so I'll try and explain what it's showing. So from the left to right, in descending order of, if you like, importance of the library in terms of primary responsibility. So that pale blue, it represents how effectively the number of mentions of the library against primary responsibility for one or more of the RIM activities. So in the Netherlands, then the library is mentioned over 50% of the time as having responsibility for different RIM activities, whereas we get down to Peru, the library is only mentioned 8%. I think there are a couple of things I want to just point out here. I won't go into all the detail, but if you look at the UK and Australia, the purple bar there in the middle, the 48% for the UK and the 48% for Australia represents the research office. Now, and these are significantly, well, Peru is also similarly high, but for UK and Australia, these are obviously higher than Netherlands, US, and Italy. And I think that can be explained again by the fact that both the UK and Australia have very embedded and important national research assessment exercises, which the research offices run. So, and the one other thing I wanted to note, because this is something that I was very interested in, is the responsibility of academic units. So that is the darker blue, and it's fairly low for most of them, but it is the highest in the Netherlands at 25%. And again, that's an interesting thing to consider why that should be, whether it's because of the fact the Netherlands has long had research information systems, and perhaps they were traditionally actually centred in the academic units rather than the research office or the library. But that's something to investigate further. So I think I will now hand back to Rebecca, who will talk about persistent identifiers.
Thanks, Anna. I think Mary, okay, I have control of the slides again. So the persistent identifiers were also particularly interesting to me. So we asked about the types of identifiers being used. So we asked first about researcher identifiers being used in RIM systems. And of course, many RIM systems use more than one, and that's reflected in these responses. But we found that ORCID is definitely leading as the most commonly used person or researcher identifier with 73%. Followed by Scopus ID and Researcher ID and PubMed ID in particular, and those can then break down regionally. You know, you might see more with the PubMed ID in the United States, for instance. While ORCID seems to be becoming increasingly important in this landscape, I think that it's important to recognize that there is still a need for multiple types of identifiers depending upon your metadata source. And so we find that a number of institutions are working to make sure they have the right Scopus IDs for their researchers if they're harvesting metadata from Scopus. And same practice for researcher IDs if they're harvesting data from the Web of Science, and so forth for PubMed and other types of services. And we were also interested in what the practices were related to organizational identifiers. And we found that, for the most part, institutions are really not using organizational identifiers in their RIM systems, 77%. There are some uses with authority files, GRID, Ringgold, or the Cross-Ref Funder Registry, but they're really quite small. And so that's really congruent with some other research, some qualitative research that we had done here at OCLC in collaboration with LIBER, the Association of European Research Libraries, in which we looked at practices, particularly in 3 European countries, and how they were using person and researcher and organizational identifiers in their landscape. So in this case, it's actually been really nice to compare our survey results here and to find them really that they're closely congruent with what we found in some qualitative research as well. So very little use yet, I would say, of organizational identifiers. But strong evidence that ORCID is really becoming the de facto standard in the scholarly literature, but not replacing the need for other identifiers. So I think we're getting close, actually, to our slides. We have our references listed here. And actually, we all kind of breezed through those because I think we were worried we wouldn't have enough time. So we have plenty of time now for questions, and I'm going to open it up to Marilee to field those.
Yes, so thank you, Rebecca, Anna, and Jan. That was a great overview of those very detailed results. I'm not seeing anything in chat for the moment, so I'll just remind people that to open up the chat window at the bottom of your screen, there's a bunch of icons, and there's a little chat bubble down there. So I hope that people are furiously typing away their questions for you. So I hope that you do that. You've got the experts here on hand. Here's a question from Alvin Hutchison from the Smithsonian. Did you ask about the use of linked data or the creation of a cross-RIM facility to search across systems? So Anna, I think you were drilling down on the results about kind of system interoperability.
No. Hi, can you hear me? I think I've been muted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Alvin. No, we didn't ask that, but that's something that it might be that we want to ask in the future in terms of the specific systems that can enable that. I assume that is something that is quite prevalent in the US in particular. I'm asking.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, this is Rebecca. I'll respond with that. There are within the Vivo community, and also I think through, and Jan might correct me on this, some efforts supported by the National Institutes of Health, efforts to aggregate multiple researcher profile systems, mostly to support expert discovery. So there are some cases of that in the U.S. We did not ask questions about that. It could be actually an interesting question in the future.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'll just throw in that at the University of Minnesota, we did do have done a little investigation of linking up, using linked data with our profiling system to hook up with our library catalog and do some interesting things with discovery there, discovering our own researchers through our library system. It's really just kind of an investigation. What could we do? We haven't gone any distance on that, but I think that's something that people are interested in looking at further in the future.
Other questions? I have a question for you. I know that when I do surveys, I always wind up with kind of more or different questions than I started with. One of the things that you said that you do differently was to require that country, that people say what country they're representing. Were there other things that you wished that you could have that you had asked, or other things that you might drill down on if you were to do follow-up interviews, for example? Are there kind of tantalizing questions that you still have?
I'll try to tackle this first. We didn't require country in part because of some
GDPR.
Yeah, yeah. It was some. I was trying to look for the word. It was really some conservatism in our approach related to GDPR, the General Data Protection Rule.
Yep.
Yeah, out of that was just coming in policy in Europe. So we'll all know more about that when we repeat the survey. As for things that I think that we could probably ask differently in the future or drill down on is still the question, or that I think merits more qualitative research, is this possible merging of product categories related to RIM systems and institutional repositories. I think, our responses revealed some possible confusion about the questions, but also some changing perspectives on this. And in particular, we had a good sample from Italy, but that had also answered questions on a survey by UNIS and euroCRIS a couple of years earlier related to this. And what was interesting was that their systems haven't changed. They're still using sort of a centralized system built on DSpace CRIS. But they had previously thought of those as separate systems in the survey from 2 years ago. But then when they answered the questions to us, they actually thought of them as a single system. And so we're sort of left to say, wow, should we do some interviews to clarify that? Or because it suggests to us a difference in perspective rather than in technology. So Anna or Jan, if you want to follow up on that more too, please.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and I think the questions about whether your RIM system is your default repository or whether you're interoperating with the repository, I think that's quite difficult for some people to understand the difference. So I think, and that did come out in the way you suggest, Rebecca. I don't know. Can I add another thing as well, which I don't know if you have mentioned, and that is that we were quite surprised by the low number of respondees from the US. And so, but it might, of course, be that many of the US respondees didn't put their country in. But I think that's something that I think would be particularly useful when we run the survey again, to try and ensure we get really good coverage in the US as well, so that we can see what's emerging in the US.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We particularly saw low responses, or lower than we expected responses from users, for example, of Vivo. We really would have liked to see more there, and we'll be seeking different ways to reach out to the communities that we feel like we've missed, and communities that we may not even know about the next time around.
And this is Rebecca. I'll add that I think that that's also a problem with the community understanding, our definition of research information management. Basically, if you're collecting this metadata about your institution's publications, regardless of your main use, we wanted to hear from you. And I think, though, that there's some disconnect in just definitions that I think, we're hoping will solidify over time, that we can have sort of a larger global discussion and understand that many of our uses may be different, or our drivers are certainly different, but we're still doing a lot of the same things, and hopefully we'll have better results in the future.
So this is Marilee again, and I have not seeing any questions, and I do hope that people are taking advantage and typing some questions in. But I'll just take advantage of the time myself and ask a question. One of the things that was very interesting to me was the number of people who were using homegrown systems, and I'm wondering if you might speculate as to why that is. Do you think that that's because people don't find the things that they want in the marketplace, or because they're trying to make something affordable or take advantage of homegrown systems that have been developed for other purposes? Because I can imagine that that could be quite a significant investment of your own time, your own time and treasure as opposed to just treasure. So wondering what accounts for homegrown systems.
Anna, do you want to try this one?
Yeah. I mean, I think the reasons you cite, Marilee, I would say all of the above. I mean, it is interesting, and it's probably, I think, interesting, but we don't think we showed the slide to break that down by region as well. And it could be that you could argue that maybe those people who can afford the various commercial systems have already gone that way, and it's those people who haven't got the money for those systems who are investing in homegrown systems. That might be one explanation, but I think it will be useful to see that and look at that more from a region by region basis, because also there are different traditions from the different regions in the world as well in terms of developing homegrown or systems indeed based on open source software, for example. I don't know what your view is, Rebecca or Jan.
Yeah, I'm trying to recollect, Rebecca, maybe you'll remember this, but it seems to me that when we looked in the survey at what people did first, what their first RIM system was versus what they're using today, we did see some movement going in between, and I think it was particularly moving from a homegrown to a vended system. So I think there is definitely some movement. As you just said, Anna, it's kind of all of the above. People use different things for all kinds of different reasons. I talked to a colleague at another institution yesterday who said they had to use a homegrown system because it had to interact with another homegrown system that was already in place.
Yeah, and I'll sort of maybe summarize that in saying that, one of the conclusions of our report is that we look at this as a fairly new product category, if you will. There's a new need that arises. There's no products that serve that need, so institutions respond by building their own. And then, in the last decade or more, we're beginning to see sort of vended services with growing user communities. There are a lot of institutions that have indicated, as Jan said, that they've moved from homegrown solutions to a vended solution or even an open source solution. And we'll ask questions about that when we repeat the survey, which we'll probably do in 2 to 5 years, keep that really broad. I would predict that we'll see more movement in that direction, but we'll see if I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
And I also don't mean to offend anyone, particularly in the Dutch community, by saying this is a fairly new product category, because in some parts of the world, and Anna may laugh, it won't feel particularly new. In some parts of the world, they're just moving from a homegrown solution. But in the Dutch, they're sort of on their 3rd generation. So it looks different in different places.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I am not seeing any questions. You all were so efficient in getting through the very rich information that you had to share today. And of course, there's a wealth of resources available on our website. Here is another question from Mercy. Do the panelists have ideas or guidance for how whoops, sorry, that just scrolled off my screen. For how the results of this survey might be used to help ensure that a library is seen as a stakeholder in RIM where it is not already.
Anna and Jan, I think since you're in the field with this right now.
I think it's useful to demonstrate to libraries, and I think we found this, didn't we, in different parts of Europe, where I think in Germany in particular there was some lack of understanding why libraries should be involved in research information management. But I think if you can demonstrate that elsewhere libraries are involved in different aspects of research information management, that can be used, I think, to help maybe encourage other parts of the world or other librarians to investigate and see whether it's something that they could add value to for their institution. So I suppose just demonstrating where libraries are playing a part and what sort of part they're playing and why they're playing a part, I think that is very helpful.
And I'm just going to add that I think that libraries need to see themselves as stakeholders too. So that is part of the battle, is looking at how, for libraries themselves, to look at how this has been done in other places, see examples and case studies of where and how the library added value, to really understand what it is we bring to the table.
Great.
Yeah, and I might just sort of summarize that, is that it's really important to recognize that the library is one stakeholder of many. And I think an ongoing interest we have here at OCLC is understanding how libraries work with other stakeholders and how libraries effectively communicate their sort of value proposition in the space and others to those other stakeholders. I think that this was something that was on our radar, but also this research here also, I think, helps us realize we need to do more in that area, and there's more that we can do to serve our research library partners in this regard. So stay tuned. I think you'll be seeing more about that from us.
Yes, that may be a perfect place to end. I'm not seeing any other questions, although if one pops up, we will certainly take it. Just a reminder, as Rebecca said in chat, this rich information is all available at the shortened URL oc.lc/RIM, and you can dive in there more. Of course, the OCLC RLP staff is always available to you to answer your questions, Rebecca in particular. But all of us really love to hear from you. So please do get in touch with us. So we're going to wrap up about 10 minutes early. Return 10 minutes of your day to you. So go forth and do good things with those 10 minutes. Just a reminder that this event has been recorded. We will post this and the slides to the webinar and follow up with an email when that is all available. So I want to thank once again our panelists for a great event, and we will see you next time. Goodbye for now.